welcome to Piecing It Together with Annika and Ben. I am Ben.
And I am Annika, and we are here talking to people cultivating pockets of peace in a world that all too often assumes violence is inevitable. We are exploring a different corner of the peacemaking imagination, and that is the realm of genre horror and fiction horror. The reason I wanted to talk about this is twofold. Number one, I think in faith communities especially, which is where Ben and I really live and work, horror gets kind of a bad rap. It's considered, it's considered juvenile, it's considered disgusting, it can be written off as something not worthwhile. But we have I'm really excited about this group. We have a group of ministers here who are all horror fans. And we all met each other in the world of peacemaking work. So there's something interesting going on here with this shared interest in a genre that tends to be very violent and a real world set of values that are really set on combating violence. And I want to talk about what might be going on there. So I am so excited to introduce our guest today. We have with us Reverend Ashley Bair. Ashley is a Presbyterian minister made in the Midwest and currently living in Brooklyn, New York. You can find her making messy art, reading lengthy fiction, curating lots of playlists, traveling towards water, collecting and using the hottest hot sauces she can find, and sitting in the back row of every movie theater for every horror film. And along with Ashley, we have Reverend Timothy Wotring, who is a minister serving 2 congregations in Northeast Philadelphia, and who has a fondness especially for the slasher horror subgenre. Ashley and Timothy, so good to see you. Thank you for joining us.
Hello, so good to see you. Thank you for
Yeah.
having us.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah. I want to start by just tell us, what is your history of horror? Is it something you've been into since you were little, or is it something you kind of found your way to later? What got you into it?
Yeah, I can go. There were some gateway horror movies growing up that I watched. Right, there's like Halloween Town on Disney or Jurassic Park, Beetlejuice. These kind of things like got my feet wet a little bit, and then when I was a freshman, a first year high school student, I was in show choir, and there was a junior who was obsessed with horror, and he had a Halloween party and introduced me to Halloween, the movie, Ice Cream Man, It. And there was just like, I had someone to look up to who loved the horror genre already and could speak about it eloquently. And so I was like, there's something about horror that I just have felt attracted to, and I've never stopped watching it. So that was actually 2000. So it's been a journey.
It's been a quarter of a century.
Yes,
which is for those of us who are still convinced 2000 was 5 years ago, is a little bit difficult to wrap your head around. But
it is.
Yeah.
We can do the math. Yeah, for me, I would say the eloquence came much later. I grew up in a very large family with a lot of cousins, a lot who were older than me, some who were younger than me. And horror or scary movies in general were a constant with my cousins, especially the older ones. So I would say when I was probably too young to be watching the genre, I started. I have 2 really specific memories. One is of me in the basement of my cousin's house, and there must have been 6 or 7 of us cuddled on the floor, putting out like blankets on the floor and pillows on the floor and all getting close together. And we watched The Grudge.
Oh my God.
The US version of The Grudge. And we were terrified out of our minds. And we stayed up all night in the basement, just like screaming at every little creak of the pipes and anything that could possibly, and growing up in the Midwest, of course, like the wind in the house. And I mean, we were up all night. And then the next day we were laughing madly at ourselves. And so that's a core memory for me. And then another one, when I was a little bit older, was watching Silence of the Lambs, which was, of course, a slightly more sophisticated horror film,
Mm-hmm.
in the sense that the plot became, for me, at the age that I watched it, such a reflection and mirror of society that I think earlier and younger, when I was watching, I wasn't quite able to capture. And that really excited me because it opened up the doors to what horror I think is really trying to do and why I love the genre so much. So I think that was about when I was in high school, probably a freshman in high school or just leaving junior high. I watched that and it felt like a light was clicking on, like an aha moment of like, oh, I've been watching all these movies with my cousins and we're having such a great time because we're scaring ourselves senseless. But actually, there's layers. There are many layers to this genre. And so then I started going back and rewatching some movies with my cousins. And so the genre both holds this great nostalgia for me in the sense that it reminds me of these times with my large family when we were just like finding ways to be together and experience certain things together and be scared together. But it also, in that, is a very fun genre for me to watch in the sense that I feel like it, like, unlike any other genre, holds up a mirror
Mm-hmm.
to both its place and time. And I just am fascinated by that.
Nice. There's some facets in your story, Ashley, that are in mine too. All of the timelines are very different. I did not get into it as a kid because I was a wimpy kid. I got so scared so easily. And Timothy, I'm glad you named Jurassic Park as one of your earlies because I think that gets thought of as adventure, but I think it's also a great monster movie. And it's actually the first movie to give me nightmares. From the trailers alone. I did not watch it as a kid, but the trailers just got in my head, and I've had recurring dreams about getting chased by dinosaurs since I was like 4. I did not see it in full, I think, until I was like 18. Uh, so credit where credit is due. It's a good movie. It's scary. And yeah, Ashley, I think I got into it also kind of realizing what it can do as a way of kind of exposing social truths. I don't think I was really drawn towards it until the two big ones. I think the first one that gave me that light bulb moment was Get Out, which I heard the reviews for before I saw it and was like, oh, they're wait a minute, we're doing something very serious about like the reality of racism in the US. I want in. I want to know what they're doing. And then also I think my growing interest in horror movies coincided with the 2016 election, when I was really angry. I was really angry. I was scared, but also anger was the primary emotion. And I think being able to engage some stories that really had very explicit and real threats to like the characters felt very cathartic because I felt like, yeah, I'm also doing this in real life. My threat is much less interesting and much less explicit, but also like I'm feeling this threat and I'm feeling this like adrenaline spike on a daily basis. So yeah, I think holding up a mirror, that's a good way of thinking about it. And Ben, I know you are also a horror aficionado. What is your history with this world like?
I am a horror fan because of my grandmother. So I used to spend. Now you guys are making me feel a little ancient because I'm going to take us back to the 1980s when I was a child. But I used to stay. She used to let me stay up against my mother's wishes to watch the Friday night frights and the Saturday night horror movies. And I started as a very small kid with Godzilla. I was obsessed with Godzilla. But then, I mean, I saw The Exorcist when I was like 10, which was such a bad idea. and thought I was possessed basically for 2 months after that, right? It was just horror. Anytime my stomach hurt, it was the devil. I was waiting for the writing to come up on my stomach, right? And so grandma would just let me watch this stuff. And so I just started enjoying it as a kid just because it was like a fun house, right? I mean, it was scary and it made you feel scary. And then, you had to make yourself feel not scared. And it was a whole thing. But as I got older, I started to see, I'll tell you, the movie that actually made me appreciate the depth of horror films, and this is, it usually shocks people when I name this movie, is the movie Pumpkinhead, starring Lance Henriksen, which I believe was back in my era, back in the 80s, right? Because as I remember watching it one day, I was a theater student. And so I was studying theater, and I remember watching it one day and thinking, oh my goodness, this is a morality play about vengeance. This is about the sin of vengeance and what happens, right? When vengeance is unleashed and when all this terrible stuff happens, right? And so like others, then I would go back and start rewatching things, right? So something even like, I think Friday the 13th, the original, is one of the best movies, ever made. And when you go back and look at it, you're like, oh, wait a minute. Like, these are very sympathetic characters. Like, they're not just mindless murderers. Like, they have depth and there's layers to what they're doing here. And so, I think even today, like as I fast forward, because one of the things I'm obsessed with right now is found footage. That's my favorite genre currently. But also, I've been thinking a lot about nihilistic horror movies, things like Terrifier, right? Which is just unbridled violence for 2 hours. It's just a nightmare, right? And I've been thinking about like, what does that one mean, right? Like, what does that have to teach us? And I thought, well, look at the moment we're in, right? Like, we're kind of seeing what unbridled violence looks like. We're kind of seeing what unchecked, appetite looks like, right? And so Art the Clown is very much alive culturally in a lot of ways, right? And so, so I think I agree with everything that's been said, right? It's definitely just this weird mirror that it holds up to us to show us the worst, right? To show us the worst truth we could possibly deal with, and then say, now you're going to deal with it, right? And we're going to get through it, and then, and I love the little moral codes of the old slasher films in the 80s, right? You can't have sex, you can't do drugs, you can't drink, or you're going to get killed, right? I love all that stuff, all the morality involved in that kind of thing. So yeah, I think it's a misunderstood genre. Like, people think that it's this hollow, empty thing that's just like zombies jumping out of the wall or whatever. And it's like, no, it's actually a very nuanced, right? And very, very layered kind of thing. So yeah. But it's grandma's fault.
It's grandma's fault. Yeah, I do think almost everyone has a like communal aspect too, of like, oh yeah, it's what you watched with your cousins and then you stayed up all night, and it's what the cool kid in your class watched. It's what your grandmother watched, and it's what your friends really wanted to drag you to see. That was mine too. Yeah, the communal aspect is real. The mirror aspect is real. She's a comic artist, they're a comic artist. Their name is Mel Gilman, and does a lot of stuff for young adults, but has a really lovely comic that I can't remember the name of. I'll have to look it up. But it makes the case for like letting kids engage media that's too scary for them early. And the case they're making is like, little kids already experience the world as scary. They don't have a lot of power. They like, adults are basically in control of what happens to them across the board. They're already living in a world that's a little bit much for them. And what horror and what scary media can do is it can model ways to react to that. Like, you can fight, you can hide, you can plan, like there are things you can do. And yeah, I think that goes hand in hand with kind of the thing you're talking about of what we're scared of on screen kind of is this like manifestation of what we're scared of in real life.
Well, I also think like, because I think one of the other weird things, like, we're all here, right? And we're all ministers. So clearly the satanic effect did not happen, right? As we were watching these movies. I was growing up during Satanic Panic. It was like the height of Satanic Panic, right? My favorite movies were the Satanic. I love Satanic Panic movies. So I think, it did not have the effect on me people think it's supposed to, right? Maybe it's because I had a slightly traumatic childhood, right? And so I had seen real stuff. Or maybe it's just because my grandma always put the world in perspective for me, right? And made me understand what's real and what's not real. And like, that maybe the news is actually kind of scarier than what you're watching here. And so I think it's a lot of just about how you're introduced, right? How you think about it. And, if you start to, if you can click with the empathy that they actually do try to exude, right? I mean, you do connect with people in under horrific circumstances in very different ways. And so I do think my empathy has been enhanced by sort of caring about these people, right? But anyway, you all look well balanced to me. I'm assuming none of you are worshiping the devil in your basements or anything like that. But and you were exposed to this thing, right? So what do you think is the positive thing that it's done for you?
Well, I think that's interesting because two things sort of popped to mind as you were saying that. And the first is that my personal favorite subgenre is possession.
Mm-hmm.
Interesting.
I love the Exorcist films. I love Paranormal Activity films. I love all the Conjuring movies. And as you were talking, I was thinking about the Conjuring universe, which includes, The Nun and The Nun 2 and Annabelle movies as well. Now they've created this whole universe around this. But every film that was made, James Wan, the original director, brought in Catholic priests to bless the set, to give prayers over the actors and the crew, and they were an integral part of making the movie. And there's a great show on Shudder about the history of horror where they go back to The Exorcist, which I think is probably one of the first, it's considered the greatest horror film of all time, and I have to agree. But it probably one of the first major possession movies. Into the mainstream of film, and the same thing was happening there. Although there are all these sort of legends and lore that came out of that film, the idea of religion being separate or sort of antithetical to these films, I don't think is actually the reality. There a lot of times they're really inclusive of that. And it makes total sense to me, I think, as people in a caring profession or a faith-based profession, that would be interested in that because, as you were saying, the core of each of these movies is actually based on a very real fear.
Mm-hmm.
And we all fear something. And it's probably why we each have a subgenre that we're so attracted to, right? Because there's something about an itch that it scratches in us or a fear that it sort of hits on the nose that we want to learn more about. And I was thinking of The Sixth Sense. And Haley Joel Osment gave an interview years later, about that movie and all the things that he kind of had to go through and thinking about torture and thinking about trauma and as a 10-year-old, like how to get into the headspace of that when you probably haven't experienced much of that, or maybe you have, but to get into that mindset as an actor. And there's a great line at the end of the film where Bruce Willis's character says everybody needs help, even the dead, even the dead need help.
Mm-hmm.
And Haley Joel Osment said that was really the core of the film. It was about communication. And I think when we sort of flip our fears on their heads, we find out what the core of the movie is about, and it's usually about what we're not doing. Right? The fear is about these people coming in, or we're seeing dead people and they're trying to talk to us, but we don't want to see it. And so we go away. And so the core of the movie is about communication. And I think that's a lot of what draws me into the genre and why it makes total sense that we would have four ministers talking about it, because isn't that what we do? We really try to meet people in their fears. And as peacemakers as well, right? There's a lot of violence and fear in the world that people try to ignore. And when we're
Actually,
confronted at it
as you
and
were
we have to look
talking,
at it.
you made me think, like, I'm going to interrupt and I'm going to take us on a little sideways moment for a minute. But I literally just preached about demonic possession yesterday, because I'm doing a Halloween series for October. And I think like what you're saying is incredibly true. And I think that, those movies really scare the hell out of me. I'm not going to lie. Like, there are two kinds of movies I can't deal with: demons and zombies, because I consider them both probable that they may happen at some point. And I just
It's
find them
too real.
really
Yeah, too
scary,
real.
right? But the thing I found in possession movies is that there are these little stories of like hope, right? These little stories of like, because it's always like the guy comes in, his faith is a little shaky. He's not sure if he's a good priest or not. He's, maybe smoking a little bit and drinking a little bit, right? And, living a weird life. And then suddenly, he becomes the self-sacrificing, kind of martyr, right? Who gives himself for this. But, so yeah, I mean, I think those movies, like, if you don't think horror genre has an overlap with religion, you've lost your mind, right? Because they have a very direct Venn diagram that links the two together. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you.
No, actually, I do appreciate what you were saying about ministers' roles in kind of helping people combat fear, and this as a kind of cathartic genre. Was there a thought that you did want to finish? Because I know Ben got excited and jumped in.
I do that a
But
lot. I'm sorry.
I want to make sure. Yeah, please do. By the way, this is a very yeah.
No, I think just to go to the question, it makes sense for people who want to work with people and who care about people and who care about bringing hope to the world and to themselves, that horror could be a very cathartic medium for that, because it just so acutely addresses all of our fears. So that's yeah, that's it. That's
Yeah, and I think that's why slashers for me, because usually there's some sort of final, I mean, a final girl or final, someone who is, like Grady Hendrix, the author. He's written a bunch of horror stuff. He gave this wonderful presentation about final girls. I saw him in 2021. I still remember a lot of what he was saying, and he was like talking about how like all final girls are our older sisters, like putting their hand behind us, right? Running into the woods, but reaching out and like helping us to get away from the killer, from death, from the terror that's happening, which I feel like is what we do as ministers
Mm-hmm.
in general. Like we want to be that final girl helping people to like escape from the terror, but also to combat it, not always run away, but also to be there and uh, with people. And so I feel like that's why slashers to me, even though, like I love the sort of like the slashers personalities, like the Freddys, the Michaels, the Jasons, there's like something about each of the final girls that I feel connected to as well.
Mhm.
Yeah, I'm glad you spoke about your slasher love because I know like so every kind of new genre that pops out comes with a moral panic. That's just part of the vibe. But I think slasher's got an especially interesting kind of one. I know when like Friday the 13th and Halloween were coming out, the pushback was like, what kind of pervert wants to watch a bunch of kids get killed? Like what is and there was a real like um yeah, like pearl clutchy kind of reaction to it. But also the tickets were selling like mad. And so yeah, it kept being making there's clearly an audience for it. Slashers are a tough one for me. So it's helpful to hear kind of, yeah, no, the how much of yourself you can project into it.
Yeah, I feel like
Well, and
slashers
I
kind of
think
have to have a like. I just don't like gore for gore's sake, right? I mean, it has to be a thing that's happening for a reason.
Yes.
I think Timothy too, you might be able to speak better to this, but since Terrifier was mentioned, Terrifier and also I would say Hostel, because actually my high school job was working at a movie theater. It's when the Hostel movies were coming, and I grew up in a very, very small town, and so there were two things to do: go to the mall or go to the movies. And so we had to sit at the time. We had to have the staff sitting at the door to check everybody's tickets because these kids were trying to go and see Hostel. It's a very violent movie. But I believe the filmmakers later said that the inspiration for the film came from the torture that was happening at Guantanamo Bay.
Oh my
And I don't
gosh.
know, Timothy, if you can say more about that, but again, I mean, it goes to show that even some of these genres that seem particularly violent still
Hmm.
have purpose behind them.
Yeah, I mean, Eli Roth's History of Horror. Well, I think that's what you were mentioning earlier. But yeah. I mean, that's where I took it from. But also, like Ben talking about Terrifier earlier, just saying how nihilistic it is. It just feels like we're in that age, and even with like the final Halloween ends, Laurie Strode, the final girl, writing in her journal saying, like, evil cannot end. Like, evil is always going to exist. Like, we can't just kill the mass killer. Like, evil's always going to be around. And that's how the movie ends. And you're like, wait a second. I need this catharsis. I need to have the release. I don't want to have another masked killer or another or more evil in the world. And so, so I think that's kind of the vibe of um, horror currently.
Well, slashers
Yeah.
kind of introduced us to the immortal killer, right? The killer that cannot be killed, right? So,
Yes.
because, and which is again, like, there's no sense of relief. Like
Mm-hmm.
once you can literally not stop the thing from occurring, right? And so,
Yes.
I mean, it is true. I mean, every slasher just started ending with this sense of dread that, like,
Yes.
Jason is still there. Like, he's going to come back,
Right.
right? And so I just think, but it was a sign of the anxiousness of the time, right? I mean, that we were always worrying about, economics and global militarism and, all these things that were going on. And so we were an anxious people, who believed that evil couldn't be stopped, right? And,
Right.
and so it was a reflection of where we were. And that's what makes me worry about Terrifier, actually. Like, what is it reflecting about us? Like,
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's
What
looking
are the
at
evils that cannot be stopped?
yeah, unchecked violence, right?
yeah.
Mhm.
I think that's another thing I find kind of cathartic about horror is I know it gets a lot of heat, and I'm curious how you all square this with like so we all met in the realm of the Presbyterian Peace Fellowship. We all met in the realm of like peacemaking work and looking for alternatives to violence in our own real world. Um, I'm curious if you how you all do folks kind of know that about you, and does that affect how you engage this genre in like conversation with your congregants or not? But I was thinking about this question for myself. I'm kind of trying to square that circle. Um, and I think what it is for me is horror is is one of the spaces in which the violence is really named for what it is, and like it's considered horrific. It's meant You're meant to have a bad reaction to it. You're meant to feel uncomfortable, and you're meant to feel the threat. Um, in a way that I don't know if violence always does the same thing in, say, like action movies or war movies. I think there it tends to be glamorized. And I mean, I think you can get into arguments of taste and meaning when it comes to like gore for gore's sake. But even in those, even in like your Hostels, your Saws, your House of Waxes, like we're not pretending that the violence is cool. We're like, no, it's supposed to feel terrible because it is. And I don't know. I think just living in a world where so many people are willing to write off violence as like justifiable, just being able to be in a space, even in fiction, of like, we're just gonna call this what it is, which is horrific. Yeah, I think that's where I find the meaning. I am curious, as ministers, do folks come to you knowing kind of those two facets of your life, your interest in genre horror and your interest or your skills as a minister? Um, yeah. Do you have those conversations? What are those conversations like?
I mean, well, I have, and one of my former congregations actually, when some of the members found out that I was a horror fan, left me a bunch of Stephen King novels on my desk, that they had read, to share and talk about. I just got a text message actually from a former coworker of mine who texted me about some haunted house in New York City that he wanted me to know about. I think in my experience, it's been very embraced.
Hmm.
Um, I think mostly because I take the approach of it being, a hobby and genre love of mine, not like a necessarily anything more than that. But what's interesting actually to me about that and what it invites from people is that there's sort of an undercurrent usually of folks who have a love for horror genre and aren't sure where to place that. And then when they find
Mm-hmm.
out that I also love it, it sort of opens up the door to have some really good conversations about, okay, well, you gave me Stephen King's The Stand. Like, what is it that you really liked about that you want me to read it? And, or you saw this movie. I remember when the latest Exorcist movie came out a couple years ago. A few of my coworkers and I went to it and we had this great conversation about it afterward. And so I actually feel like sharing that piece, invites a lot of really good conversations and sort of maybe helps to dissuade that thought that religion and scary movies can't be together. Maybe helps to bridge that conversation a little.
I wear my Scream shirt or my Jason shirt. Like I'm pretty upfront, like just wearing t-shirt, like horror t-shirts to church. Not usually on a Sunday. I'm usually in a I'm wearing a
You
collar. I'm
have
wearing a
other
collar.
vestments on
I've got
Sunday.
other
I'll
vestments
give you
on, but
$10 out of my own pocket to do it.
I could
An
probably
easy
do it.
$10.
Yeah.
I could do it at one of the churches. I don't know about the other one, but maybe they know that about me. I've had lots of side conversations with people like, "Can we talk in your office?" Okay, I just watched. Yeah, so
Uh-huh.
I get those kind of conversations. Also, the last Bible study I led for October, like we have a larger Bible study that happens like with a meal, and then I do a weekly Zoom one. Uh, but I was like, let's talk about horror and the Bible. And like we went through like I wrote down the list, like I was like demon possession, exorcism in both humans and animals, supernatural events, ghosts, gore, torture, nudity, psychological torture, beheading, eaten by worms, people who've died by suicide, final judgment, like cosmic horror. And I'm
Sure.
like, that's all there. I'm not adding anything. I don't feel like I'm the weird one here. This is our text. This is our scriptures. So I feel like they understand, and I try to give it, like, present it in a way that they could consume it, like feeling like, okay, our pastor's not that weird. I mean, he is, but he's not that weird. Like, he's not.
Well,
Um,
you're not the first one, certainly, to put this on the table in the context of like a faith community. Yeah.
yes.
Yeah, and also just to say that I think one of the things that's troubling in church space is that for a few decades now, they've mirrored a lot of the political world, which is that there are a series of things we don't talk about.
Mm-hmm.
And whether someone likes horror or they don't, I think what I've noticed by simply just being true to myself and what I find and enjoy in it, it helps that piece. Because there's a long tradition, at least from some communities that I've been in, where there's a list of things you just do not talk about. And that including in the church. And so anything that we can do to help say, well, why not? Well, why not? What's underneath that um is a good thing.
So, in my study at the church is the box from Hellraiser. It sits on top of my bookshelf because I love the Hellraiser. I love Clive Barker. And so, people often ask me what that is, which usually starts a little bizarre conversation. But no, I mean, I wear this on my sleeve. I mean, everybody knows. And actually the reason my congregation, I think, was so open to it was that it was a grandma story. Like, I mean, it started as a grandma story. Like, this is what I did with my grandma. Like, we hung out, we talked about the spooky stuff. Right. But I think, like every year now for, I think the last 2 years, 3 years, maybe, I've done Holy Horror Fest in October where I preach through the more horrific pieces of scripture, right? Like Nebuchadnezzar, that story's bonkers, right? And so, this idea, right, that the Bible contains stuff, right, that is unsettling, right? The Psalms are filled with unsettling stuff, the parts that we edit out when we make our greeting cards and stuff, right? But the Bible has this stuff in it, and it's not there by accident, right? So we have to face it. And that means we have to face some pretty serious and pretty upsetting things, right? Horrific things, things that reek of horror. And we have to make some kind of, we have to either come to peace with that or find some reason to sort of understand its presence, right? Why that was happening at the moment. And then see the contrast, right? When Jesus comes along and says, nope, none of that works anymore, right? We're going to get rid of all of that. So, it's sort of like we're preaching, being ministers, providing pastoral care. We are living both sides of that fence, right? We are living both in the hope of Christ and the violence of the past, right? We are living in the violence of people's lives, right? And the hope that we're trying to give them to survive, right? And to keep moving. And so, I think the reason, Annika, you mentioned a little bit ago, other types of violence and other kinds of movies. The reason I think horror is different is that horror is not a hypocrite.
It's
Yeah,
naming and
it doesn't
claiming what
try
it's
to, like,
doing.
I think war movies try to give us reasons why it's good, right? Why this is a good thing to do, right? Heroic things, action heroes, right? Shooting people's faces off, right? So, I think horror just says this is a thing, like this is it. I don't have to give you a moralistic reason for its existence. It exists, right? Now face it. And so, I think that's why people find it kind of unsettling and jarring and try to avoid it.
Yeah. Well, I'm so struck. I didn't think of it until you mentioned, Ashley, the way in which like churches sometimes have a culture of like there's things we don't talk about. Because I grew up in absolutely a family culture like that, and a religious culture like that, and it took me a while to get into horror. And I'm realizing now, like, oh, a part of it was this like I was embodying the same thing I'd seen modeled of like, oh, you don't touch it if it's uncomfortable. You don't pay attention to it. Why would you? But even like, yeah, coming back to horror as a mirror, anytime you're in a movie and the movie starts with something that no one will name or no one will talk about, you're like, uh-oh, here we go. Cause that's going to be the thing that gets dug up. But you have to name it and you have to confront it or else it just haunts you forever and ever. Amen. That's a really interesting read on like, yeah, just the ways in which the culture and the stories that come out of it kind of intersect with each other.
Yeah, I think it's what intrigues me so much about the genre in its entirety is understanding that piece, right? That
Mm-hmm.
we are coming out of that time, or maybe some of us are still in that time of listing the things that are culturally appropriate to talk about and those that aren't. And even coming from a place, thinking about violence. Well, like if we don't watch it and we don't pay attention to it and we don't read about it, it doesn't exist.
Mm-hmm.
And having to kind of put that at the forefront to say, well, okay, let me start this movie with extreme violence because that's actually happening. There are people to which this is their daily existence. And kind of confronting the viewer with that immediately, whether it's, psychological, body, or imaginative. I mean, and I find that piece of horror just so fascinating because then I'm immediately going in asking the question, what are they asking us to really
Sure. Yeah,
take
yeah, yeah.
away? What is it that we're viewing? What is it that we're listening to? What is it that we're absorbing right away?
Well, if you think about, like, I was thinking about, like, even in the Bible, right? When Jesus, for example, confronts something scary, so Jesus confronts demons. It's a pretty not uncommon thing, right? And so our first response is to turn it into a metaphor, right? That Jesus is healing a mentally ill person. First of all, I think that's an insulting interpretation, because I think that it actually demonizes mentally ill people, and sort of associates them with a lot of stuff that I don't think they should be associated with. But the other thing is, what if sometimes a demon is just a demon, right? What if Jesus was actually confronting the embodied evil, right, that was plaguing this poor person? And we don't want to deal with that, right? Because the idea that these things could be real is unsettling. And so we'll turn it into illness, right? It's the same thing we do with guns, right? We don't want to talk about the real cause, so we'll blame mentally ill people, right? Because the real violence is too much for us to deal with. So let's turn it into a sickness, right? Let's turn it into a metaphor. And then we don't have to deal with it. And so I think horror takes all that away from you, right? It won't let you do that. There are no metaphors. There is no symbol, right? Jason is coming at you in 3D and there's nothing you can do about it, right? So there isn't that chance to escape, right, through sort of our symbolisms and our sort of metaphors for things. And so, I think, again, that's why it's attractive to some and repellent to others, right?
Yeah, and one subgenre that we haven't mentioned yet, but I think deserves some kudos, is zombies.
Yeah.
For that reason as well, because the first zombie movies were commentary on anarchy. Like, what happens if there's complete societal collapse and everything that your government told you would protect you is gone? And there's a interesting sort of debate in the horror world about slow zombies or fast zombies, and what those things mean about society. It's a complete reflection, but yeah, I just a shout out to zombie
Well, yeah, and
movies
when
and
they
zombie
turned,
fans out there.
28 Days turned it into a rage virus, right? Now suddenly it is this actual contagious violence, right? And it's just pure appetite, right? It's just pure, uncontrollable stuff. That stuff bursts into our world sometimes, right? And we don't like it. But yeah, I think zombies deserve a lot of talk because they are sort of Armageddon, right? They are the apocalyptic figures of horror films, right? And they are scary as hell. I'm just going to say that right up front. And they are also kind of hard to get rid of. And we don't really know what, causes them exactly. And, they just keep going and making more and more and more.
And they were people,
yeah,
and now
like they were human, and now they're these things, right? I don't know. This is an Easter egg for anybody who was a fan of The Walking Dead. I would have stayed at the CDC. That's always been my position.
Yeah, it creates this world where we're surrounded by people we know who we don't recognize.
Right.
And then we have to find ourselves in the mix of that. Are we going to become one of them, or are we going to fight against it? And the idea of vigilantes roots itself in the zombie genre as well. And what kind of justice will the world find?
Yeah, Ash, you mentioned zombies as like a metaphor for anarchy, and that's legitimate. I always think of it though, like, part of it is like the capitalist zombie, like which is it's surface level, but I think it's legitimate. Like, God, how many of you feel like you've just turned over your whole life to 40 hours a week and now that's just your life? Like, your creative self takes the back burner to literally just like surviving and eating. I can't remember where, but I read an article once kind of pointing out that zombie movies tend to pop up in sync with like economic recessions. And it's like, yeah, because how are we all feeling? We're exhausted. We're just dragging along, man.
Well, and George Romero would agree with you. When he was making, he's granddaddy of the zombie films, right? And he would say that, like, this is consumerism to the point where you're literally eating each other, right?
Yeah.
Because there's nothing else left to eat, right?
There's nothing else. Yes.
Yeah. And so his second film takes place in the mall, right? Which is like, it's the height of, that sort of 80s consumerist craziness. I don't know if you guys ever got to see the malls in their heydays. But they were impressive things, right? But they were like these temples to greed, right? And so that, they are consuming, They're just consuming and consuming and consuming, and there's just a hopelessness about them.
Yeah. I also, the one more thing I wanted to say about him, the fact that some of the zombies are always people you know or knew. And so even when you know how dangerous it is, your protagonist then is tasked with, do you steel yourself and take the shot, or can you overcome this kind of human connection? Um, I don't know, man. I'm thinking about that right now in terms of like, I got family members who are Trumpers, like, and the I don't think there's something in them that's inherently like sinister, but I do think they're hanging out in cultural spaces where that is just the name of the game. And they have been pulled in and pulled under. And like I'm in that spot all the time of like, I don't want to sever this relationship, but I cannot be in that space with you. What do I do? And like I think there's something there too in the human heartbreak of the zombie narrative of like
Yeah.
losing somebody to it. Do you want to stand your ground? Do you want to stand your ground? Do you want to be a peacemaker in a world that's just turns to violence all the time? Or do you want to join the horde because it sucks, but it's easier? I don't know. Yeah, that's a really real fear.
Oh yeah, I mean, I think the most poignant moments of every zombie film, and even The Walking Dead as well, are based in the relationships that
Mm-hmm.
have
Mm-hmm.
to be addressed and sometimes severed. Um, and I mean that's the core of every good piece of storytelling, of course. But the reality, like we mentioned earlier, of that in the zombie world, these are people you know. It's even there is a societal piece, I think, still as well, but the more poignant moments are recognizing people who have changed
Mm-hmm.
and addressing, yourself in that. And so yeah. I love zombie movies too. There's a lot there. There's a lot to unpack in that world.
Well, and I think Annika, you're getting like you're getting us to the point where I think we can pivot a little bit to what the hopeful part of this is, right? I mean, we're clearly all fangirls here, right? We're just like we love horror movies, right? Um, but I think the thing that gets overlooked, and I think it gets overlooked because you have to watch them to see it, is that they also display people showing remarkable courage, right? They
Mm-hmm.
show people making incredible sacrifices. Ashley, you mentioned the Conjuring movies earlier. They're a love story. They're about two people who love each other so much that nothing could get in the way, right? And that love
Yeah.
overcomes all this horrible stuff, right? And so for me, I cry at those movies because I just think they're lovely, right? It's like it's not even the scary stuff, it's the romantic part of it that gets to me, right? And I think you find that in all of them, like even slasher movies, right? The
Mm-hmm.
final girl is like a
It's a
kick-ass woman,
triumph.
right?
Yeah.
Who has come to really take control, right? And when the chips were down, right, she stands up, right? And so, I mean, I think they do just there are heroes in these movies, right? And there are complicated villains, right, who act out of motivations we understand, like vengeance, right, or love, or the or sex or whatever, right? And so it's the complexity of them, I think, is where we find the ultimate hope in them, right? Because it's about people confronting this complexity and then finding the very foundational things that keep them alive through it, right? Like love, like relationship, like community, like, the zombie apocalypse, the only counter to it is a human, like a growing humanity, right? And so I'm rattling on, but I mean, yeah, I mean, I think there's so much hopeful stuff about what peace looks like, right? And what the absence of peace looks like, and how to build peace under very outrageous circumstances, right? So I do think that they're ultimately hopeful little tales.
Hmm. Yeah. The root, I think the root of the Conjuring films, which I love so much and could also go for an extra hour on, is can love conquer evil?
Right.
using that second word intentionally. I think that the movies would. But yeah, I mean, I don't know if you've ever seen those videos of Lorraine Warren. She's like so sweet and so kind and so friendly, and she was part of the first few, and then she has since died. But every one of those films ends with her touching the person possessed somehow to bring them back to a state of consciousness and saying,
Mm.
remember your family, remember that you are loved, come back to us. And there's this immense cloud of love in these movies.
Yes, and like even when there is a lot of violence, I think it's also an opportunity for those of us who call ourselves peacemakers to like think of alternatives in general. Like we see all the violence, like could something different be?
Hmm.
Like
Yeah, yeah.
can we find this alternative way? And then there's like some movies that do it, like like the Babadook, where this grief spirit ghost lives with them. Like, well, that's the end of the movie. Like the sort of like the scariness is like they like live in not community, but kind of like they're able to tolerate one another. They know what each other needs and how to get out of each other's way, and so this demon is no longer haunting this family. It's beautiful. There's no violence other than maybe like eating meat or something, but like in that way. But beautiful. Or at the end of Nightmare on Elm Street, sort of the way that Nancy Thompson tells like Freddy Krueger, like reminding him who he is. There's no violence being used. It's sort of just like, remember who you are, you weirdo, and you like have no power over me. And so I think there's like ways to like think of like seeing it in beautiful like ways, like on Nightmare on Elm Street and the Babadook, and thinking of how we could do it maybe even differently using our imaginations. And so yeah, those are, because that's kind of
Yeah.
those are like my train of thought when
Yeah,
it
you
comes
made me
to
think
that.
of Clive Barker wrote a story called, I think it was called The Chattering or something, but it's about the idea that the most annoying thing for a demon is that nobody was paying attention to it. That it kept trying to scare them and they would not respond, right? So it was
Yeah.
throwing things, and it was, and they were doing it on purpose because they knew that that would work, right? And so there is an element of this that also exposes the powerlessness of evil, right? And that, friends, is what we traded, right?
Right, right.
Jesus killed it on the cross, friends. Evil is powerless, ultimately. And so, there's an element of that in the best of the movies, right? And I thought of the Babadook because it almost becomes like a mockery of evil, right? Like,
Yes.
now we're going to keep you in the basement like some weird
Right.
pet or something, right? So yeah, I mean, I love those kinds of, and it's always a non-violent thing, right? That sort of,
Mm-hmm.
that ends it, right? Especially in the supernatural stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think Timothy, what you said about kind of imagining another, and harken back to Mel Gilman, and why kids should be engaged media that scares them, because yeah, like the world is scary. So how are you gonna respond? Are you gonna fight? Are you gonna hide? Are you gonna create something new? All real. This is gosh, this is a thread that we could pull with more time that we don't have
No,
too. But Ben, as
I
you were,
feel like there's a spin-off podcast, like the Ministry of
yeah, there's
Horror or
a part
something that's just
two
waiting to happen,
here.
right? Where we
Yeah, yeah. But as you were talking about sympathetic villains, and kind of that these stories are like, no, there's still usually a motivation there. I'm also thinking about, how many like queer theorists and fans have found a home in horror, and feeling like if you've been cast as monstrous, all right, you're not going to see yourself necessarily in mainstream media and in the heroes. So where are you going to see yourself? You're going to see yourself in these heartbroken figures, pushed to the margins. And I think where I find maybe hope in language too is I think sometimes horror stories can give us a vocabulary to talk about stuff that is really hard and ugly. Um, I'm thinking back. I feel like I tell a damn hospital chaplain story every time we're on these calls. But I'm going to tell you another one. One of my favorite times to be rounding on patients was October, because all of the cable TV channels are just playing horror nonstop, and so like 80% of the rooms I went to, they had on a horror movie. And it was a fun little back and forth because they'd sometimes get sheepish when the chaplain walks in about it, but then I could ask them like, "What are you watching? Oh, have you seen it before?" And like, yeah, I think there was I was so struck by like how many times I met like people who were sick, people whose bodies were really messed up, who like that was what they wanted right now. Because I think it look, that is the world they are in right now. Is they are in the midst of body horror. They are in the midst of what does life look like after this? Is there a life after this? And yeah, those stories kind of, I think, gave us permission to get into it and to talk about how shitty and scary things are in that space.
Well, and I think too, like, yeah, I think I like your point about villains, right? I mean, I think that if you're a kid who's growing up, right, who's told you're an abomination, who is, told that there's
Mm-hmm.
something wrong with you or that you're not, you can't be normal, right? You can't identify with heroes, right? And so you start to see villains as strong people, right, who sort of stand up, right, for themselves when they feel like the world is against them or whatever. And I mean, I've said before, my entire personal aesthetic is based on the evil queen from Snow White. So, because I identified with her as a kid, right? And so I think even the worst villains, right, have something, right, that we can probably connect to, right, or probably at least sympathize with to some degree, right, unless they are literally just mindless, whatever. I mean, I don't know if we relate to Jason very much, except maybe in the first iteration of the story. But his mom, we do, right? Um,
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes you think you go, girl, right?
Well, and I think that kind of that framing is good for our heroes too, because like that's the other side of this affirmation of all people as children of God. That's a discipline too, because you're gonna get some real assholes who you just
Mhm.
don't get and don't like. But like, no, listen, no one. Well, very few villains act that way in a vacuum. So what's going on? What have they missed societally that's put them there?
Yeah.
Yeah. No. Well, Ash and Timothy, this has been a delight. Thank you so much for joining. Is there any closing thoughts, anything about your work or your philosophy of horror that we haven't covered that you would really want people to know?
Yes, I mean, I would still recommend for people to read if they want to go even deeper into like the philosophy of horror, like read Carol Clover's, right? Yeah, Men, Women, and Chainsaws. I still think it's from the early '90s, but it's still a great piece on horror and how to interpret it, and sort of like all the movies that she wrote about in the early '90s still exist. Still like as a franchise. So like she even talks about Alien, which just became a TV
Mm-hmm.
show. So I think that I was like reading, like flipping it through yesterday, just to get some of my thoughts together. But also, I think for me, what helps and why I love horror is because a lot of these actors are unknown or like not well known, and so like it gives them a platform, and it's helpful for them in their career. It's nice, and we get to see like newness and new ideas happening. Even though I love the franchises, there's always movies or TV shows that are going to be off the beaten path, which I appreciate about horror. Uh, and also, I think it helps give us like I love dissecting sort of like the cosmology in these horror films. Like I feel like each of them don't share like a cosmology. I mean, it's interesting watching something like Insidious and like feeling like, whoa, what is it? What is going on? How can we see these demons and them not? How's there a red door? Like that kind of stuff. And like I think it just sparks my imagination even more. I think that's why I just love horror.
I would add to that. I would recommend the book Gospel of the Living Dead if you like zombies. And I think there's another one called Lurking Beneath the Surface, which is a theological examination. But you make a good point. If we want to talk practically, right? The reason I love found footage horror movies, for example, is they are ridiculously low budget. The sound is always terrible. And the acting is so. But I love the idea that they can still scare me with no budget, right? I mean, I like what they do with nothing because to me, it is sort of like going through a fun house or like an old haunted house, right? Because it's all jump scares usually and that kind of stuff, but they still get me. They'll always get me. And so, I think there is something about horror movies never being taken seriously, right? That forced them to do a lot with less, right? And so they just became more artistically creative about the way they were presenting things. And, some of them, of course, abandon all that for CGI the way other people do. But some of them don't, right? And some of them still want to do it the way that it's very guttural and very primal, kind of the way they did it, right? And it wasn't slick because life isn't slick, right? I mean, they're just honesty. They're just low budgeted honesty as far as I'm concerned, right?
I think there's freedom too in kind of being a genre that like you're gonna get an R rating off the jump. You
Sure.
know that you're not gonna be a mainstream appeal. Like I think there's some freedom to do some fun and funkier stuff there. I know there's still like a whole fight for horror makers like at the censor's office of like where's the line of what's quote unquote too much. But as far as like content and storytelling goes, yeah, I think you're a lot more free.
And I would just say the same about the horror community. My last thought is just a shout out to the horror community because I find it to be one of the most inclusive, embracing, open, warm, welcoming places. I recently joined the Brooklyn Horror Society. Shout out if you
Hey,
but it's just I have found, to kind of accumulate what you were all saying as well, like I will go see any horror movie. I don't see everything in theaters. In fact, probably most things I won't, but if it's a horror film, I'm there. I don't even care if I don't know anything about it. And part of it is for the experience of watching it, regardless of what it entails, but a large part of it is because you will find the best people there, um, who will accept you wherever you are in the world of horror. Whether it's your first time and you're like Timothy, like you were saying, like what the heck is going on? Or you've seen every horror film that was ever made. I just got back from Comic-Con
oh
yesterday.
yeah,
Timothy
that's
was there
right.
as well, and I went to a Shutter panel on Saturday night. It was full of people who literally, I mean, it didn't matter what was coming up and what was coming forward and what they were talking about. There was just so much enthusiasm for this kind of movie being made because of the truth telling, because of the creativeness. I mean, I think a lot of them are straying away from CGI and saying we want to hire artists. We want to hire crew, the right crew. Like we want to create something for the process of the creation as much as the outcome. And so I just want to shout out the horror community for their ethos and values, even though sometimes the genre reaches the outermost parts of what we allow. The community is great.
And the actors really appreciate their fans. I mean, like horror actors are also lovely humans. I mean, I've had exchanges with Art the Clown on social media, right? So, and it was lovely and sort of political and, that kind of stuff. But they really do. They just thank people for being there, right? And showing up and giving them this chance. And so I think there is just a humility, right? And a
Mm-hmm.
kindness that just comes out of this community, which I guess shocks some people. I don't know. Not me.
Yeah. I kind of get that because I'm thinking someone named earlier like there's a level of bravery you have to engage horror, and bravery and vulnerability kind of go hand in hand. So I wonder if there's something about this story style that helps people kind of let their guard down. Like, oh, you're here doing something a little scary and a little brave too.
And a little subversive.
Yeah. And a little, exactly. Things that could get you side eye from the church ladies who don't talk about the scary things. But yeah. Well, Ash and Timothy, thank you so much for being here. I am going to try to collect some of our book recs and some Brooklyn Horror Society info in our show notes. And I'll also invite listeners, if you consider yourself a peacemaker and would like to share your story, email us at info@crispypeacefellowship.org. If you are horror curious or you are another horror aficionado, check out some of the book recs that have come up. And if you would like, no, I already said that. Excuse me. If you'd like to join us on the show, invite yourself in. Send us an email. We would love to hear from you. Go in peace.
Click like and follow.
Horror season. Click like.
We have to say
follow.
that now. Like, that's so important.
Click like and follow to hear what the Presbyterian Peace Fellowship is up to. Yes, and go in peace and happy October, everybody.